In the third standard cycle of the diplomatic mission to Earth, a single laminated photograph sat on the briefing table aboard the V-Theory vessel Quiet Tide. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet, when nobody wants to be the first one to speak. 3 officers stood around the table. Captain S. Sarath of the Shallow Currents had her primary tentacles folded in the posture our species uses when we are trying to appear calm and failing. Archivist Pemv was making the soft clicking sound that meant her bioluminescent receptors were overstimulated, and I, Senior Liaison Othuvelden, was the one who had placed the photograph on the table. The image was small, glossy, smiling. 4 humans in red insulated coats stood on a flat white plain. The sky behind them was a brilliant, cloudless blue. One of them was holding a small flag, another was holding a thermal flask. They were grinning. The kind of grin our cultural analysts had been trained to recognize as positive affect, low threat, recreational context. It was a vacation photograph. And it was the most disturbing object any of us had ever seen. I want to be very precise about what happened next, because it matters. Captain Sarath looked at the photograph, then she looked at me, then she looked at the photograph again. And in the careful, formal tone our species reserves for moments when reality has stopped behaving the way reality is supposed to behave, she said, "Liaison, please confirm. This is what they showed you when you asked the question." I confirmed, the question being, "What are you afraid of?" There was a pause. Archivist Pemv, who had spent 40 cycles cataloging the cultural artifacts of 17 sapient species, made a sound that none of us had heard from her before. It was small. It was very tired. She said, "I would like to retire now, please." She was joking, mostly. That was the moment, standing in that briefing room above the Indian Ocean, that I understood we had made a categorical error in our approach to this species. Not a minor error, not a translation error, a fundamental error in how we had been thinking about humanity for the entire mission. We had been asking the wrong questions. We had been looking at the wrong threats. We had been preparing for the wrong dangers. And the answer to all of it was sitting on the table in front of us, smiling, holding a thermal flask, and wearing sunscreen. This is the story of what happened in the days after that photograph was placed on the briefing room wall. It is the story of how a diplomatic mission designed to assess a single planet's readiness for galactic integration became, instead, the story of how an entire civilization learned that it had misunderstood the meaning of the word dangerous. It is the story we do not show to our younglings. To understand why the photograph mattered, you have to understand the galaxy the Vithari come from. Not the physical galaxy, the political one. The one we built rules around. 12 known sapient species share the local stellar cluster. The Vithari, my people, evolved on a warm, shallow ocean world called Yim. The Thren live in the dense forest canopies of a tidally locked moon. The Chori are crystalline lattices that drift through low-gravity dust belts. The list goes on. 12 species, 12 home worlds, 12 completely different evolutionary histories. But here's the strange thing. Every single one of them, every single one evolved in an environment that was, by any objective measure, comfortable, stable temperature ranges, predictable food cycles, atmospheres that did not actively try to kill the species that breed them, gravity that did not crush bones, radiation levels that did not melt cellular tissue. This was not a coincidence. This was a law, or at least it was treated as one. For 300 standard cycles, the Compact of 12 operated on a foundational assumption. It was called the habitability principle, and it stated, roughly, that intelligence requires comfort. The logic was simple. A species spends so much energy fighting its environment, cannot spare the energy to develop language, tools, art, or philosophy. Brains, we had observed, are expensive organs. They require surplus. And surplus requires that the world not be trying to kill you every minute of every day. Every sapient species we had ever encountered confirmed this principle. Every single one. Then we found Earth. The initial scans were confusing. Earth had ice caps, it had deserts, it had active volcanic zones, deep ocean trenches with crushing pressure, atmospheric storms that could destroy structures, and a tilted axis that produced seasonal extremes which would kill most of the Compact's member species within hours of exposure. The planet was, by every measure our science had developed, hostile. Not uniformly hostile, patchwork hostile, beautiful in some places, lethal in others, and the lethal places were enormous. And yet there were humans living in almost all of it. This was the first thing that broke our models. We assumed at first that humans had simply colonized the comfortable zones and avoided the rest. This is what any rational species would do. You evolve in your safe band, you stay in your safe band, you build your civilization in your safe band. Easy. Humans did not do this. Humans had cities in deserts. They had villages above the snow line. They had research stations on ice sheets. They had submarines under polar cap. They had a small permanent crew of people living in low orbit in a metal can that would explode if a single seal failed. Captain Essarath, when she first reviewed the dispersal maps, said something I have remembered ever since. She said, "Liaison, are we certain? These are all the same species." I checked they were. That was when the compact authorized the diplomatic mission. Not because humans seemed dangerous. They did not seem dangerous. They seemed confused, like a species that had lost the instruction manual for its own evolutionary niche and was now just trying things to see what would happen. We did not arrive at Earth expecting a threat. We arrived expecting to issue a gentle correction. You're living in the wrong places. We planned to tell them. Please move into the comfortable zones, we can help. That conversation never happened. We never got that far. Because before we could deliver our gentle correction, we made the mistake of asking them a simple, polite question. We asked them what they were afraid of. The two humans selected as primary liaisons were Dr. Helena Marsh and Commander Yusuf Adeyemi. I want to describe them carefully, because the way they presented themselves to us in those first weeks shaped everything that came after. Dr. Marsh was a climate researcher in her mid-50s by Earth reckoning. She had pale skin that had been weathered by what she casually described as too much sun in too many wrong places. Her hair was short, mostly gray, and she wore the same dark blue jacket to every single meeting. She spoke softly, she rarely interrupted. When she did not understand something, she would tilt her head slightly to one side and ask a follow-up question that was almost always sharper than the original statement deserved. She was, in our initial assessment, the safest possible representative of her species. Calm, analytical, patient. We were relieved to have her. Commander Adeyemi was younger, broader, and had a laugh that he used the way other people use punctuation. He had served, he told us during the first cultural exchange dinner, as a logistics officer in something called the British Antarctic Survey. Captain Sarath asked him to explain. He did. We listened politely. I want to flag something here in retrospect. The first time Commander Adeyemi mentioned Antarctica, he did so while laughing about a time his tent had blown away in a storm, and he had spent 6 hours trying to retrieve it across what he described as very flat ice. He told the story the way our species tells stories about funny mishaps at family gatherings, the way you might describe spilling a drink at a wedding. Archivist Pemvi, who was sitting next to me, leaned in and asked in our private channel, "What is Antarctica?" I told her it was a region on Earth's southern pole, cold, mostly uninhabited. She said, "Mostly?" I checked the records, mostly. This was the first time the word entered our active vocabulary, and I want to note that it entered through a joke that mattered. That set the tone for everything. Dr. Marsh on the same evening mentioned that she had spent 2 winters at Vostok. The translation matrix rendered this in standard galactic with no flags raised. It sounded like she was telling us about a sabbatical. Captain Essarath nodded politely. None of us asked what Vostok was. We did not yet know we should have. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. The humans would casually drop references to places, conditions, and activities that should have been red flags, but were not, because they were always wrapped in the gentle, conversational tone you use when discussing things that everyone in the room already understands. Dr. Marsh mentioned frostbite the way you might mention a paper cut. Commander Adeyemi described being trapped in a whiteout for 9 hours as boring. Mostly, we did not understand at the time that this was data. We thought it was small talk. The mission proceeded. We toured human cities, observed their food production, sampled their art, and conducted the standard socio-cultural assessments. The humans were, by every measure we applied, a remarkably gentle species. They did not present aggressively. They did not boast about their military. They did not, in any of our interviews, express the kind of expansionist hunger that the compact had been historically worried about. Captain Sarath, in her Cycle 3 report to the homeworld, wrote that humanity appeared to be socially mature, technologically modest, and psychologically stable. She recommended that the next phase of diplomatic engagement proceed without restriction. She filed that report on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, we asked the question. The question was Archivist Pemvi's idea, and in her defense, it was a standard diplomatic protocol. Every species the compact had ever made contact with had been asked the same question in the same way during the same phase of the engagement. It was meant to be a softball, a getting-to-know-you exercise, a moment of vulnerability designed to build trust between two civilizations. The question was, what is your species afraid of? In every previous contact, the answers had been predictable. The Thren were afraid of forest fires. The Korai were afraid of magnetic disruption. The Vithari, when asked, would say, we were afraid of ocean acidification and the slow heat death of our shallow seas. The answers were always environmental, always specific, always things the species in question had spent its evolutionary history learning to avoid. It was a question, in other words, that was supposed to produce a list, a clean taxonomic list of threats that could be cross-referenced against the galactic database and used to assess what the species would need from its galactic neighbors in terms of support, alliance, and protection. We asked Dr. Marsh and Commander Adeyemi the question over what they called lunch. They were eating sandwiches. The room smelled of bread and processed meat. The atmospheric scrubbers were working overtime. Dr. Marsh paused mid-chew and looked at Captain Esrath. She swallowed, she put down her sandwich. She tilted her head slightly to one side in the way I had come to recognize as her processing gesture. She said, afraid of, like as a species. Captain Esrath confirmed, as a species, what were the things that frightened humans collectively, the threats they had learned through evolution and history to fear. Dr. Marsh and Commander Adeyemi looked at each other. There was a long pause. Commander Adeyemi laughed his punctuation laugh. Dr. Marsh did not laugh. She frowned slightly. She picked up her sandwich and put it down again without taking a bite. She said, that's a really interesting question, actually. We waited, she said. I'm trying to think of a good answer. We waited longer. Eventually, she said, public speaking. Loneliness? Failure? I don't know. There's a lot of personal stuff, but like as a species, honestly, I'm not sure we agree on much. Commander Adeyemi offered helpfully spiders. A lot of people are afraid of spiders. Captain Esrath in our private channel asked me what a spider was. I told her, she filed that away and pressed gently. Was there nothing environmental, nothing predatory, nothing about Earth itself that the species had learned to fear at the collective level? Dr. Marsh thought about it. She tilted her head the other way. This time she said, I mean, storms can be bad, earthquakes, but we have buildings now. So she shrugged. She shrugged. I want to convey to you with absolute precision what that shrug did to the room. To a Vithari, body posture is half of communication. A shrug, in our cultural framework, signals that a topic is too trivial to require further engagement. It is a dismissal. It is the gesture you use when someone asks you if you're worried about a problem that has already been solved. Dr. Marsh had just used it about planetary geology. Archivist Pemvi, who had been silent until that moment, finally spoke. She said very carefully, perhaps it would help if we tried this visually. Could you show us in any medium you choose an image that represents something your species fears? Something dangerous, something hostile to human life. Dr. Marsh thought about it. Commander Adeyemi thought about it. They consulted briefly in their own language faster than the translator could render. And then Commander Adeyemi pulled out a small flat device and began searching through what I now know to have been a personal photo archive. He found what he was looking for. He turned the device around. He showed us the screen. It was a photograph of 4 people standing on a white plain under a blue sky, smiling, holding a small flag. He said cheerfully, this was rough, worst week of my life, honestly. Captain Sarath looked at the image. She looked at Commander Adeyemi. She looked at the image again. And in the careful, formal tone our species reserves for moments when reality has stopped behaving the way reality is supposed to behave, she said, Commander, where was this taken? He grinned. He said, Antarctica, McMurdo, beautiful place. You should visit. I need to slow down here because what happened over the next 3 days was the single most important diplomatic event in Vithari history, and I do not want to skip the details. The photograph was, on its surface, exactly what Commander Adeyemi said it was, a vacation photograph. 4 humans in red coats, sunshine, blue sky, a small flag. The kind of image you might find in any cultural exchange archive, but we ran the image through our environmental analysis suite. We did this quietly in the privacy of the quiet tide, while the humans went about their normal evening routines. The results came back within an hour. Archivist Pem brought them to the briefing room personally, which she only did when something had gone wrong. She placed the report on the table next to the photograph. She did not sit down. She said, Captain, the environmental readings in this image are not survivable. Captain Esrath asked her to clarify. Pem clarified. The ambient temperature in the photograph, based on the visible weather conditions, and the geographic coordinates Commander Adeyemi had mentioned, was approximately negative 40 degrees Celsius. The wind speed, based on the visible flag tension, was approximately 50 kilometers per hour. The combined wind chill would produce frostbite on exposed Vithari tissue in under 60 seconds. The atmospheric oxygen at that altitude and humidity was thin enough to cause cognitive impairment in any of the 12 member species of the compact. The ultraviolet radiation due to atmospheric thinning at the polar region was high enough to cause cellular damage with prolonged exposure. The terrain offered no native food source, no fresh water beyond what could be melted from ice, and no shelter for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. The image was, by every standard the compact had ever applied, a photograph of a death zone. Captain Sirath said, "How long would a human survive in those conditions without specialized equipment?" Pem said, "Approximately 2 to 4 hours." Captain Sirath said, "And the humans in this photograph appear to be posing for a vacation photograph." "Yes, Captain." The room was very quiet. I was the one who eventually spoke. I said, "Perhaps the photograph is misleading. Perhaps they were only outside for a few moments. The image is a single instant. We are reading too much into it. This was, I want to note, the correct hypothesis to test. It is what any trained xenologist would say. Do not assume the worst. Look for the simpler explanation. Maybe the humans were inside a sheltered habitat that simply was not visible in the frame. Maybe the photograph was taken during a brief controlled excursion. Maybe Antarctica, as a place, was a kind of memorial site that humans visited only ceremonially." I held on to this hypothesis for approximately 11 hours. That was how long it took for Sasha Brennan to walk into our briefing room. Sasha Brennan was not part of the official diplomatic mission. She was a retired travel guide who had been hired by the Earth Cultural Liaison Office to assist with what they called informal cultural orientation. We had been told she would be joining us to provide an additional perspective on human leisure activities. She arrived at the briefing room carrying a cup of what humans call coffee. She was in her early 60s. She had short white hair and an enormous waterproof bag over one shoulder. She glanced at the photograph on the briefing room table as she walked past. She did not break stride. She said casually, the way one comments on the weather, "Oh, Vostok, I went there on my honeymoon." Then she sat down, opened her bag, and pulled out a small notepad. We did not speak for what the chronometer later confirmed was 47 seconds. Captain Esserath very slowly turned her head toward me. I very slowly turned my head toward Archivist Pemv. Pemv very slowly set down the data tablet she was holding and pressed her primary tentacles against the surface of the table in a posture we use when we need additional sensory input to confirm that the world has not become hallucinatory. Sasha Brennan looked up from her notepad. She noticed the silence. She said, "Sorry, am I early?" Captain Sirath said, "Miss Brennan, you went to Antarctica on your honeymoon." Sasha Brennan said, "Yes." Captain Sirath said, "Voluntarily?" Sasha Brennan laughed. She said, "Well, I didn't go by accident." There was another long pause. Captain Sirath looked at me. I had no idea what to say. She looked back at Sasha Brennan. She said very carefully, "And this was a positive experience for you." Sasha Brennan grinned. She said, "Oh, it was wonderful. The penguins are amazing. Although the trip out was rough, we got stuck in pack ice for 2 days. But honestly, that was kind of the highlight." Bill loved it. She took a sip of her coffee. Captain Esserath stared at her. I stared at her. Pemve, I noticed, had begun pulsing very faintly in the corner of her dorsal mantle, which is what Vithari do when we are trying not to scream. Sasha Brennan, sensing that the conversation had stalled, helpfully added, "If you're interested in going, I can recommend a great tour operator. They do 12-day cruises out of Ushuaia." That was the moment the hypothesis collapsed. Over the next 3 days, we extracted from Sasha Brennan, Dr. Marsh, and Commander Adiemi a complete picture of what humans actually do in Antarctica. I'm going to list the findings now in the order we receive them because the cumulative effect is important. Humans visit Antarctica recreationally. This is established. They pay money to do this. The annual tourism figures in the years before our arrival were in the tens of thousands of visitors. Humans also work in Antarctica permanently. There are research stations operated by approximately 30 different nations on Earth. The stations house scientists, engineers, cooks, medical staff, and in some cases, the staff's families. Children have been born on the continent. Humans race across Antarctica. There are organized foot races, marathons, ultra-marathons. People train for years to participate in these events. The winners receive medals. Humans ski across Antarctica, solo, unsupported. As a hobby, there is an entire subculture of humans who attempt to traverse the continent on foot, dragging their supplies behind them on sledges for no reason other than the personal satisfaction of having done it. Humans dive under the ice of Antarctica recreationally. With cameras, humans get married in Antarctica. Humans, and this is the one that broke Archivist Pemvi completely, send their adolescents on educational expeditions to Antarctica, organize school trips, approved by parents, funded by educational grants. The adolescents are taught how to survive in the conditions, given specialized clothing, and then released onto the ice for periods of up to 4 weeks. They take photographs, they write essays about it when they return. Dr. Marsh, when she explained this to us, was very enthusiastic. She said it was a transformative experience for young people. She said it taught them resilience and self-reliance. She said her own daughter had gone on such an expedition at the age of 17 and described it as the most important experience of her life. Captain Serath, when she heard this, asked Dr. Marsh to repeat herself, not because the translator had failed, because she could not believe the words. Dr. Marsh repeated herself. Captain Serath thanked her and excused herself from the room for approximately 20 minutes. When she returned, she had recovered her composure. She asked, in the careful voice she had been using more and more often during this mission, whether the humans considered Antarctica to be dangerous. Commander Adeyemi laughed his punctuation laugh. He said, "Oh, sure, you can't be careless out there. People die. But that's true of mountains too, or the ocean, or driving on the motorway." He said motorway the way he had said Antarctica casually. As though it were obvious, as though it required no further explanation, I asked because I could not help myself. How many humans died on motorways every year? He thought about it. He said worldwide, roughly 1.25 million. He said this. Then he ate a biscuit. That was the moment I understood what we were dealing with. It was not, as I had originally feared, that humans had a higher tolerance for hostile environments than other species. That would have been a quantitative difference, a larger number on the same axis we already understood. It was a qualitative difference, a different axis entirely. Humans did not perceive their environment the way every other sapient species in the compact perceived theirs. They did not have, in any meaningful sense, a fear baseline that matched the physical realities of their world. The conditions that should have produced collective species-wide anxiety produced, instead, hobbies. Tourism, children's educational programs, casual anecdotes told over sandwiches. They were not brave. Brave would have implied they recognized the danger and chose to face it anyway. They simply did not recognize it as danger. It was to them just Tuesday. After Antarctica, we began going through the rest of the human photographic archive. We did this systematically with the help of Sasha Brennan, who had been delighted to be given a project and who treated the entire exercise with the cheerful enthusiasm of a grandmother showing visitors a slideshow. I want to walk you through what we found, not all of it. The full archive is classified now, sealed in a compact facility under access restrictions that did not exist before this mission. But I can describe the broad categories. There were photographs from a place called Chernobyl. Humans go there on weekend trips. The site is a former nuclear disaster zone. The radiation levels are still measurably elevated. Tourists pose in front of an abandoned amusement park and post the images to their social networks. Sasha Brennan had been there twice. There were photographs of humans welding underwater, not in shallow water, in deep water, at depths where the pressure would compress a Vithari body into a slurry. The humans wore specialized suits and operated for hours at a time, joining metal seams on oil platforms and shipwrecks. It was a profession. It paid well. Sasha told us. Her nephew did it. There were photographs of humans climbing mountains, not climbing them safely, with equipment on prepared routes, climbing them without ropes, climbing them in winter, climbing them in deliberately reduced oxygen. There was a queue, we learned, to climb the tallest mountain on Earth. An actual queue. Humans waited in line in conditions that would kill them within hours if their equipment failed for the privilege of standing on a summit for 10 minutes and then climbing back down. There were photographs of humans holding their breath underwater. Recreationally, competitively, to depths that should have collapsed their lungs, there were photographs of humans in orbit, floating, smiling, doing somersaults inside a metal tube held together by seals and bolts with hard vacuum a few centimeters away on the other side of the wall. They sent live broadcasts. They answered children's questions from schools. There were photographs of humans on the surface of an active volcano. They were taking samples. They were also smiling. There were photographs of humans swimming with predatory marine megafauna. Voluntarily, with cameras, Captain Esserath, on the third day of this review, asked Sasha Brennan a question that I have remembered ever since. She asked it gently, without judgment, because Captain Esserath was a professional. She said, "Miss Brennan, is there anywhere on your planet that humans do not go?" Sasha Brennan thought about it. She tilted her head. The way Dr. Marsh did, she frowned slightly. Eventually, she said, "Not really. Not for long anyway. If we can get there, we usually do." Then she said more thoughtfully, I think that's kind of the point, isn't it? Going places, I do not think she understood what she had just said. I do not think any of them understood. That was the horror of it. The horror was not that humans were brave or aggressive or expansionist. The horror was that they had no internal sense that not going somewhere was an option. Their species, somewhere in its evolutionary history, had simply lost a part of the brain that other species use to recognize when an environment is saying, go away. They heard the message. They just interpreted it as an invitation. I want to be careful about how I conclude this account because the conclusions matter and they are not the ones we expected to draw. The standard galactic threat assessment before our mission classified species along 3 axes: aggression, technology, expansion velocity. A species high in all 3 was considered a potential danger to the compact. A species low in all 3 was considered a candidate for protected status. Humanity, by every measure we applied, scored low on all 3 axes. They are not aggressive. They spend more on entertainment than on weapons. They have not, in their recorded history, ever waged a war of conquest against another sapient species. They could not, even if they wanted to. They lack the technology. They are not particularly advanced. By compact standards, they are roughly a Tier 2 industrial civilization with localized Tier 3 capability in specific domains. Their starflight is limited to their own system. Their energy infrastructure is primitive. They are not expansionists. They have a single inhabited planet, 1 barely populated moon facility, and a scattering of orbital stations. The total human presence beyond Earth's atmosphere is fewer than 300 individuals at any given time. By every metric we had, they should have been safe. They should have been candidates for gentle integration. They should have been the easy mission, but the photograph changed everything because the photograph revealed something that none of our metrics had been designed to detect. It revealed that humans are a species whose internal hazard model does not match their external environment. They live, work, raise children, and take vacations in conditions that would terminate any other compact species within hours. And they do not notice. They do not flinch. They do not recognize the conditions as conditions. They simply exist in them. The way the Vithari exist in warm, shallow water, the implications of this took us months to fully process. The compact convened 7 emergency sessions on the matter. Specialists were brought in, philosophers, xenopsychologists, a retired ambassador who had once spent a full cycle observing the Thren and had written extensively about adaptive cognition. The conclusion they reached was uncomfortable. It was this: a species that does not recognize hostile environments as hostile is not a safe species. It is not a brave species. It is a species whose threat detection system has been rewritten by evolution to point in the wrong direction. And once a species like that develops the technology to leave its homeworld in numbers, it will not leave the way other species leave. It will not seek out the comfortable zones. It will not cluster near familiar biomes. It will go everywhere. It will go to the cold places. It will go to the hot places. It will go to the places that are actively trying to kill it. And because it does not perceive those places as hostile, it will not understand why other species are not already there. It will arrive in our shallow oceans, our forest canopies, our crystalline dust belts, and it will not understand why we built our cities only in the comfortable parts. It will look at our unused territory, the volcanoes, the polar regions, the deep ocean trenches, and it will see empty land. It will see opportunity. It will see the way Sasha Brennan saw the photograph of Vostok, somewhere worth going on a honeymoon, and it will go cheerfully, with sunscreen, with a thermal flask, with a small flag and a grin. This is not a grin. This is something the compact does not have a word for yet. We are working on it. In the meantime, the photograph from Antarctica was removed from the briefing room wall. It was sealed into a classified archive on the compact homeworld. The archive is labeled in the formal script of the 12 with a designation that translates roughly to material that will confuse the younglings. I do not know if we made the right decision. I think about that photograph often. I think about the 4 humans in their red coats standing on a plane that should not support life, holding a flag and a thermal flask, smiling at the camera. I think about Sasha Brennan's honeymoon. I think about Dr. Marsh's daughter, 17 years old, on her school expedition to a continent that would kill her in 2 hours without her clothing. I think about what it means to live on a world that is trying to kill you and to not notice. I think about what it means when a species like that arrives at your door, holding a thermal flask, asking if you would like to come hiking. The galaxy spent 300 cycles waiting for the dangerous species to arrive with weapons. We watched the stars carefully. We monitored the radio bands. We prepared protocols for hostile contact, for aggressive expansion, for warfare. The dangerous species arrived with sunscreen. It arrived with a vacation photograph. It arrived smiling because it did not know it was supposed to be afraid. If you have made it this far and you're wondering what we did next, I will tell you. We finished the mission. We filed our reports. We recommended that diplomatic relations with humanity continue, cautiously on the understanding that humans are not what we expected, that they will never be what we expected, and that the compact will need to develop entirely new frameworks to understand them. We also recommended that no Vithari child be shown the Antarctica photograph until they have completed their full cultural training. The image is too destabilizing. It teaches younglings to question the habitability principle before they are ready to understand what replaces it. If you want to know what replaces it, I'm still working on that. We all are. The next time you see a photograph of a smiling human in a hostile environment, and you will see one, if you spend enough time around them, I want you to remember something. They are not posing for you. They are not performing courage. They genuinely, completely, sincerely do not understand why you would find the image disturbing. That is the most dangerous thing about them. That is also, I have come to believe, the most remarkable thing about them. I do not know yet which of those two truths is the larger one. I think the galaxy is going to find out together over the next several cycles, whether we want to or not. Subscribe if you want more. I cover the parts of the galactic record that got sealed on purpose. The next file is already on screen. It is about the day humans were asked what they considered too dangerous to eat. You're not going to like the answer.